They say heartbreak doesn't kill, it just rearranges the way the body remembers air. That night, I coughed on silence so long I forgot how to inhale. My name is Lena, and on my 15th anniversary, my husband Theo texted me a photo of the office pizza party with a thumbs up emoji and the words, running late. As if the number 15 were just a smudge on the calendar, and not the sum of every promise we ever made. I set the table anyway, linen napkins, the good plates, the wine he once called our little ceremony, and watched the candles crawl down the wick like time learning to limp. By 9:40, I realized I was waiting for a man who had stopped looking for me years ago. By 9:50, I realized I had become the wallpaper in our home. Visible, touchable, utterly unseen. I left the roast cooling beside the stove and slipped into my coat with the quiet rage of a person building a raft out of splinters. The first bar wasn't a bar so much as a refuge, with a neon apology buzzing in the window. I ordered something the color of a bruise and stared into it like it might confess a future. Rough night? A voice asked, low, steady, carrying the warmth of a stranger who knows exactly where the edges are. He had dark hair, shaved clothes, a scar like a hyphen on his jaw, and eyes that did the thing Theo stopped doing, finding me, not just looking at me. Depends, I said, on whether we're measuring by hours or lifetimes. He laughed softly, not at me but with me, like we'd already agreed on the weight of the world. I'm Adrian, he said, offering a hand I didn't know how to accept without letting go of something else. Lena, I said, and the syllables felt like a new address. We talked until the bartender started wiping the far end of the counter in that way that means, finish your story or your drink. When Adrian brushed a strand of hair from my face and said, you look like someone who's been apologizing for taking up space, I felt the floor tilt toward a decision I hadn't meant to make. He didn't kiss me first. I kissed him like a person waking herself up with a slap, and the room roared and quieted at once, as if the universe were holding its breath and releasing it through our mouths. We left together, not because we were brave, but because we were tired of being careful. I woke up in a hotel room with a memory that pulsed like a sunburn and a note tucked under the water glass. There's a version of you that laughs without asking permission, eh? I smiled and hated myself for it, then hated myself for hating it. I went home to a kitchen that smelled like rosemary and cooling regret. Theo sat at the island reading emails, his face geofenced against any emotion that might cost him focus. Morning, he said, without looking up, like the word could substitute for touch. Morning, I answered, folding myself into the smallest version that would fit in the room. I thought I'd carry the night like contraband, hidden and thrilling and terrible. But fate prefers theater. Over dinner that week, frozen tortellini and a silence we buttered like bread, Theo cleared his throat. New client, he said, eyes bright in that competitive way that used to charm me. He's the one. We land him, we grow. What's his name? I asked, stabbing my fork into a soft pocket of cheese so hard it burst. Adrian Mercer. The air went cold inside my lungs. Mercer, I repeated, pretending it was a foreign word, like grief in a language you haven't learned yet. He's old money but self-made, if that's a thing, Theo said, smiling as if he were introducing me to the man who would finally bless our luck. At the pitch meeting Theo hosted at our house, because power is always at home somewhere, the doorbell rang like a dare. I opened it to find Adrian holding a bottle of wine and a nearly imperceptible crack of recognition in his eyes. Lena, he said, smooth as a sealed letter. Pleasure. Theo came around the corner, hand extended, future painted on his face. Mr. Mercer, come in. Adrian shook his hand like a confession he had decided not to say out loud. We made it through the charcuterie board and the bullet points, the laughter rehearsed enough to sound spontaneous. After dessert, Adrian asked if he could see the rooftop garden Theo had built to impress clients and forget anniversaries. On the rooftop, the city stretched itself in gold and glass. The wind lifted and set my hair like a gentle scolding. So, I said, you're my husband's miracle. Guilty, he said, leaning on the railing. Though miracles usually don't come with disclaimers. Do you come with one? I asked. Several, he said, and then softer, starting with I didn't expect you. We stood too close for strangers, and too far for what we were. Why my husband? I asked. Why this firm? He inhaled, then exhaled through a smile. Because once upon a time, a man named Theo Holloway took a contract from my father and turned it into his kingdom. Our families have a history. The word history rattled between us like a coin in a jar, heavy, small, incessant. This is a test, I said, or a trap. Maybe both, he said, and the honesty of it made something dangerous inside me unclench. When we were alone again, Adrian told me a story I recognized in tone, if not in detail. Betrayal dressed in spreadsheet language, revenge scented like cologne and boardrooms. Years ago, Theo had closed a deal that gutted a Mercer subsidiary. It was legal, brilliant, and merciless, and it made Theo the man who could buy roses and forget why. I wanted to take something back, Adrian said. Not money. Direction. He looked at me when he said it, and for a complicated second I didn't know whether I was the compass or the road. Was I? The question burned my tongue. At first, he admitted, not flinching. Then I met Lena, instead of the idea of Theo's wife. There are 100 ways to be lied to. The worst is with the truth half attached. I told him to stop coming by, to choose a different firm, to make his revenge out of something not shaped like my name. He nodded, hands in pockets, acceptance staged like surrender. But wanting is a lawless country. He showed up again, this time at a bookstore where I hid between memoirs and metaphors when the house felt too loud with silence. I brought you something, he said, holding out a battered copy of a poet I loved before marriage turned my sentences into lists. Inside the cover, for the version of you that refuses to vanish. That night, we didn't make grand mistakes. We made small ones on purpose. Coffee at a cafe 3 neighborhoods over, a walk where our elbows dared to brush, a kiss that happened because it had nowhere else to go. We rented hours in hotels that smelled like anonymized stories. We memorized each other's breathing patterns like sheet music. He said my name like he was returning it to me in better condition. At home, Theo talked deadlines, profit margins, and after we land Mercer we'll take a trip, as if a passport stamp could bribe a heart back to life. I tried to be kind to the version of us that had worked once. The kids we'd been, passing notes made of skin and hope, but memory is a poor chaperone. My guilt felt honest and exhausted. My joy felt stolen and brand new. I was both culprit and witness, both lock and key. The night everything unraveled, the house felt like an eyelid about to close. Thea sat in the dark at the dining table with a photograph on the placemat like a summons. My face leaned into Adrian's in the picture, the city blurring into confession behind us. How long? He asked, voice like a hallway with no doors. A few months, I said, choosing truth because at least it doesn't multiply when it breaks. Theo laughed once, but not the kind that leaves the mouth. It was a sound that fell to the floor and stayed there. I guess I had it coming, he said, and I wondered how long he'd been saving that sentence, polishing it like a coin in his pocket. We didn't scream, we didn't shatter plates. We did something far more dangerous, we were honest. I stopped seeing you, he said. Not because you disappeared, because it was easier to admire the horizon than the person next to me. I left before I walked out, I said. One day I looked in the mirror, and my mouth didn't recognize my name. Theo put the photo back on the table, edge aligning with edge. Do you love him? I love the way I exist when I'm with him, I said. I don't know if that's love or oxygen. We slept in separate rooms that night, the guest room for me, the primary for him, the hallway for the ghost of us. By morning, the decision had already made us. We would divorce without spectacle, divide the practical, and let the impossible sort itself into memory. Theo kept the house because it was strapped to his ribcage. I took a small apartment with a balcony that caught 6 minutes of sunset like a held breath. I thought Adrian and I would rise from the wreckage like a second draft with all the errors corrected. We tried restaurants with soft lighting, weekends at lakes with rented cabins, laughter that survived the check. But our origin story had teeth. The first fight was about nothing, which is to say it was about everything. The second was about loyalty. The third about the way his revenge had my name on it, even if he'd crossed it out. He said, I can be better. I said, I need to be alone enough to be sure. We paused each other like a song you still know by heart. Starting over isn't a montage, it's a spreadsheet of small salvations. I got a job at a community arts center, teaching writing to teenagers who told the truth with the blunt force of meteorites. They asked questions adults avoid, like, when did you start lying to yourself? I bought mismatched mugs from thrift stores, learned the names of the plants on my balcony, and stopped apologizing for poems that made no money. Sometimes Adrian would stand across the street from my building, hands in pockets, and wait to see if I'd wave. Sometimes I did. Sometimes I let the moment pass like weather. We met for coffee after 3 months apart, the cafe smelling like warm sugar and second chances. There's a version of me that doesn't need to win, he said. I'm trying to find him. There's a version of me that doesn't need saving to feel worthy, I said. I'm trying to live there. He told me he'd redirected the contract to a rival firm at the last minute, paid a penalty, and wrote a letter to Theo that included the words, I was wrong, without any commas to slow them down. Why? I asked. Because I don't want the rest of my life to be a reaction, he said. I want it to be a decision. We didn't kiss. We walked by the river instead, the water practicing infinity against the bank. At home, I opened the battered book he'd given me and wrote on the inside cover under his note, for the version of me that steps into her own light. I thought of Theo sometimes, the boy who once took me on a midnight drive to count constellations we renamed. I hoped he would remember we were children once and forgive us both for growing up. When the divorce finalized, my lawyer said, congratulations, like it was a graduation. I said thank you like a person accepting a mirror. People like to say they don't regret what taught them how to breathe. I'm not sure that's true. Some lessons scar on contact. But I don't regret the woman I met on the other side of the wreckage, the one who doesn't audition for her own life. I hosted a reading at the Arts Center, the teenagers loud and glorious, the room full of strangers who listened like they'd been starving for someone else's truth. On stage, I read a piece called The Woman Who Stayed. It began, I used to leave rooms before my body stood up. Now I remain until the chair remembers me. The audience exhaled in a single sound, and I felt 1,000 invisible doors unlock. After, Adrian approached with 2 coffees and no expectations. I'm not here to interrupt your life, he said. I'm here to witness it. Witnesses are for ceremonies, I said, but I smiled, because him standing there without a plan felt like the bravest thing either of us had done. We walked home down streets that had once felt like decisions and now felt like directions. At my building, he didn't ask to come up. I didn't invite him. We stood inside the ache of a possible future and let it be unnamed. In the apartment, I watered the balcony plants, watched the sun perform its 6-minute trick, and finally, quietly, forgave the girl who thought love was proof of worth. If this story made anyone feel less alone, I hoped they'd make something, not a like or a subscribe, but a promise to keep showing up for the person in the mirror. There are always twists, yes, but the biggest one is simple. The woman who leaves and the woman who stays can be the same person, as long as she chooses herself.